What's up you guys, I'm Dan, this is Frugal Not Cheap. Capital One acquired Discover just about a year ago, and this has meant some really big changes. Not only for Discover card holders who are now seeing a move where they'll be managing their credit cards through the Capital One app and website, but also we've seen some Capital One cards move from MasterCard over to the Discover network. What exactly is going on, and what is the impact of all this on my favorite credit card strategy, the Capital One Duo? Let's find out. Capital One bought Discover on May 18th of 2025 for $35.3 billion. Discover is not only a credit card issuer, but much like American Express, they both issue credit cards and have a payment network. Now, Capital One owns both the Discover brand and also the Discover credit card network, payment network. So, Discover credit card users, like those that have the very decent, actually, Discover It card, will be seeing their management for that card move over to the Capital One app and website as early as July 27th, 2026. And come to think of it, I haven't done a review of the Discover It card, I don't think, so if I haven't, I'll probably be doing that soon. So that's one end of it, and I'm sure Discover card users are going to be really keen to figure out how all that stuff works. Really the short of it for now is that it's kind of business as usual, but there's actually some added perks as well, where you can now get more cash back, sort of more earnings on rewards on Capital One Entertainment. But now that Capital One has its own payment network, what does that mean for Capital One credit cards? Obviously, they'd want to make use of this very large investment that they made. So, is that going to affect MasterCard and Visa card holders? Absolutely. In fact, Capital One has already moved over some of their users from the MasterCard network over to the Discover network, particularly with debit cards. How about credit cards? Well, some of those are already moving too. So if you go and apply for some of the Capital One cards, you'll already be seeing, if you kind of dig through, they don't give you they don't tell you what payment network you're applying for, like the card uses right away, but you can see it as you get down a little further in the process. But in any case, the cards that seem to be impacted are the Venture and Venture One, Quicksilver and Quicksilver One, and the Savor and Savor One. Anyway, so that doesn't mean that, if you have a Visa or a MasterCard card from Capital One, that it is right now already going to move over to the Discover network. This is something that's more likely to happen at the time of renewal, but it is something that's, coming up in the future. So what does that mean for the Capital One Duo, which is my preferred credit card strategy for years now, actually? This Duo is a combination of the flagship Capital One Venture X Travel Focus card and also the Savor card, which is a great 3% back card on dining, entertainment, groceries, and streaming. Now, thankfully, the Capital One Venture X being the flagship travel-oriented card on Visa network, which is actually a Visa Infinite card, this one's not being impacted. It really wouldn't make sense to move this card over to the Discover network now because, again, it is a travel card. However, the Savor cards, again, are being moved over to the Discover network from MasterCard, and one of the it's not as big of a blow as going from Visa Infinite over to Discover, but the two cards that I have with Capital One besides the Venture X are the Quicksilver and also the Savor One, and both of these are World Elite MasterCards, so there are a few perks there that, I'll be losing when it moves over. And really the biggest problem with this move to the Discover network is for people like me that live abroad. So if you live in the US, acceptance of Discover is pretty good domestically, but outside of the US, your mileage is really going to vary, and where I live in Thailand, acceptance is really not high. One thing that helps is that you can also, Discover is accepted through the Union Pay and Diners Club networks, but again, in Thailand, this is very, very limited, and just the fact that there's a couple ATMs somewhere in the country that might work, or a couple of restaurants that might work in the main cities, is very different from actually being a card that you can use on the daily in a number of places. And so for me, unfortunately, what this does is it turns the Capital One Duo into the Capital One Solo with just the Capital One Venture X. How exactly does this impact me mathematically or financially, numerically? Well, I made a copy of my Capital One Duo spreadsheet. This is in the resources link in the description for today's video. It's called Capital One Duo Discover Impact, to show the impact of the Discover thing on it. And so I've got one tab that shows you how things were before, how things are now, And then one more tab I'll talk about in a moment. But essentially this means that, for me in any way, your mileage may vary if you're still stateside, but for me it means that the Savor card is no longer valid, and so for the dining, entertainment, groceries, and streaming categories where I used to earn 3% cash back, I'll now be earning the 2% using just the Capital One Venture X. Before the move, I was getting $618 in net positive value from the Capita One Duo annually. After the move, value drops by $61 to $557. So it's not a huge change, but it's not welcome. I mean, $61 I'd like to have that I'm not gonna have, and there's really not much out there that I can see in order to offset this. So will I stick with Capital One? Well, it's a bit of a toss-up, but for now I think so. See, when Frugal Fiance and I get married, I'll be making her an authorized user on my Venture X card. But in order to take advantage of the Capital One lounges, which are excellent, and also giving her lounge access through Priority Pass, I'll need to pay a $125 a year fee for lounge access for her. That'll bring the net positive value down to $432. There is one way around this, and that would be for her to get her own card, but then we would have a little bit more of a complication of having to make sure that we book some travel on her card, some travel on my card, in order to use up the $300 travel credit and also take advantage of the $100 a year anniversary bonus on each of the two cards. And there we're talking about now an $800 total in travel that we have to spend every year. I don't think that's out of the reach, I don't think that's too difficult, so I will discuss it with her, but it makes things a lot more simple to have just the one card, so that's probably the route that we're going to take. There is another option though. If I were to move $200,000 in brokerage assets over to Citi and got the Citi Strata Elite, I talked about some really decent Citi credit card setups in a recent video, check it out. But moving those $200,000 over would give us a $145 credit towards the Citi Strata Elite annual fee. That fee is $595. Looking at my specific spend then, I could get net positive value of $485. Now again, that's for my particular spend. If I were still in the US, then I could get the values that I was looking at in that Solid City credit cards video that I talked about, and that's over $700. So stateside, I do think this is really quite a viable option, especially if you're happy doing some self-directed investing with Citi. However, Citi does have an authorized user fee. So again, since we're not getting two cards, it would just be the one card. We'd have to pay the $75 AU fee, and that brings the positive value for my shoes living abroad down to $410, which is less than just using the Capital One Venture X and paying the $125 lounge fee. So that means for now that I will be sticking with the Capital One Venture X. We might get a second card for Frugal Fiance, well, Frugal Life by that time, in order to save that $125, but I'm not sure it's really worth it. We'll have to see. So the long and short of it is I will be sticking with Capital One. I'll be sadly going from the Duo to the Solo, but that still remains the best strategy overall for me. How about you? What do you think about all this? Let us know in the comments below. Hope you enjoyed today's video and found it helpful. If you did, please hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.